We welcome you to the initial launching of the Housing Yearbook of Latin America and the Caribbean, an initiative of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. I'm Felipe Quintanilla, and it's a pleasure to be here at this event, having also authorities and specialists of the housing sector. The Housing Yearbook is created due to a clear conviction to transform the housing systems. We need to understand them better. And in order to do so, we need to have comparable, accurate, and accessible data. In this second edition, the yearbook consolidates its vocation as a regional platform for knowledge, offering more than 200 indicators that allow to analyze in a comprehensive way macroeconomic, financial, and habitational dynamics of Latin America and the Caribbean. This new edition of the yearbook is available in Spanish in the website, and you can also have preliminary versions in Portuguese and English, while the final translations are being verified. The yearbook is a tool for dialogue, compared learning, and the formulation of evidence-based policies. This is why we are really thrilled to present to you this new edition and open a regional conversation as to how to strengthen the housing systems from cooperation, action, and information. In order to start formally this event, I would like to invite Executive President of CAF, Sergio Diaz-Granados, who will give opening an opening speech. Sergio, go ahead, please. Good morning or good afternoon, and I would like to greet the President and CEO of the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy, George McCarthy, the editors of the yearbook, and the panel participants, and my colleagues of CAF, Christian Sinelli, Vice President, and Julian Suarez, Manager of Sustainable Territorial Development. I would like to welcome you to this second edition of the Housing Yearbook of Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a joint effort of CAF and the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy. Let me start with a reflection. And the thing is that access to housing, which is a structural condition for development, for social cohesion, and for the sustainability of our cities. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, this is one of the most determining barriers to close the inequalities barriers and to strengthen urban resilience. In we emphasize that the housing channel is essential in order to solve the inequalities in the region. In this second edition of the Housing Yearbook, it also consolidates an alliance with the Lincoln Institute. And this is not an isolated publication. It's a regional platform for knowledge with over 200 indicators in 15 countries. And this allows to compare, monitor, and understand in a more thorough way macroeconomic, financial, and habitational dynamics in a region. The data that regional outlook reveal are really revealing well because there's macroeconomic stabilization after the post-pandemic. Inflation is moderating, and unemployment, generally speaking, shows light improvement. However, there are very deep structural challenges in Latin America and the Caribbean, and I mean for labor informality that is around 55% on average in the region. In countries where we have informality close to 80%, countries where it's close to 20-25%. The housing deficit that affects a significant proportion in urban households, the ratio between prices and incomes that affects affordability in all the credit, and the possibility of mortgage credit access that shows disparities that are really very stressed in some countries. And these are not just statistics data. They also help us to understand that we require a new cycle of housing policies. And right now, CAF is precisely planning an inter-yearly activities in order to plan the strategies from 2026 to 2031. This is uh, a turning point between the first strategy that was very successful and this other strategy that we are just drafting. So from our board in Lima, we have to interact with the different centers of finance and economic in the region to plan a really ambitious strategy in the upcoming 5 years. And in that sense, the housing policies and the housing funding are going to play an essential role. And this is why it's essential to have this alliance with the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy because of the vast experience and academic background. And also we have a vocation of implementation. So I would like to close with this reflection. Housing is much more than infrastructure, is a space that is consolidated and where dreams can become true. And it's the sense of belonging to a city. And in second place, the yearbook is a tool for that end because it is helping governors, the academic sector, developers, developing banks, so as to make decisions based on evidence and to build a common agenda. And from CAF, we want to reinstate our commitment for support in the countries of our region with funding, technical assistance, generation of applied knowledge, and we hope to apply this yearly strategy, a pluri-annual strategy that will cover the strategy of the bank in the upcoming 5 years. Thank you very much, and the best of the success for this meeting. Thank you very much. And thank you for the commitment of the Development Bank of Latin America. Now we have President and CEO of Lincoln Institute for Land Policy, George McCarthy, known as Mac, who has been um, a champion in this policy.
Over to you. Well, thank you so much, Sergio and Luis. It's a great pleasure to join you, and I want to really thank our colleagues at CAF for your leadership and partnership in bringing the second edition of the Housing Yearbook to fruition. So I'd like to start with two very simple propositions, and they might seem self-evident, but in any case, the first one is that markets thrive on information, and markets that are starved of information are doomed to fail. And the second proposition is that housing systems do not fail by accident or lack of will. They fail because the underlying land use, finance, regulatory, and fiscal systems are misaligned. When those systems are misaligned, the consequences are visible in housing affordability gaps, informality, exclusion, and deepening inequality. What this yearbook does is it allows us to see those systems more clearly, and it provides a foundation for a functioning housing finance market and basically for good housing policy. Now, very often we think about data as some kind of technical aspect of planning, technical aspect of finance, but in reality, data is institutional infrastructure. Places that measure consistently can govern and improve consistently and can reform more strategically. And countries and institutions that share evidence through data can build trust and accountability over time. And frankly, without the institution of trust, markets themselves cannot function. One of the distinctive contributions that the Lincoln Institute hopes to bring to this partnership is often overlooked, that housing affordability is fundamentally a land policy question. Urban land values, planning frameworks, property tax systems, and regulatory constraints shape housing markets just as powerfully as credit flows do. If we want housing finance to work better, we must also ensure that land markets function more transparently and more equitably. This yearbook provides a bridge to achieve the goal of functioning housing markets. It connects housing outcomes to finance systems, to governance structures, and ultimately to fiscal and land policies, which also thrive and depend on good data. Our partnership with CAF is foundational for our work in Latin America and the Caribbean. CAF brings financial leadership, regional relationships, and the ability to translate knowledge into investment and implementation. And without investment and implementation, everything for us is just theory. And for us, impact requires something more than being able to, offer great ideas. The Lincoln Institute brings research experience in land policy issues in LAC, including informality. And together, we're doing more than publishing a report. We're helping to build an informational foundation for stronger evidence-based housing policies and systems in Latin America and the Caribbean. And just like functioning markets, effective policy requires good data. Now, I'll end on this note. So capital is necessary to expand housing access. Policy reform is necessary to improve systems. But housing markets are not only built on financing and policy, but with evidence. And evidence, when shared across countries and institutions, can become a catalyst for learning and change. We are proud to stand with CAF and with our regional partners in advancing this effort. So I thank you, and I look forward to the discussion ahead. Back to you.
Mac, thank you so much. Muchas gracias nuevamente por estar con nosotros.
Thank you once again for being with us. And now we have the honor to hear from Ana Claudia Rosbach, Executive Director in the United Nations, and she's one of the most influential voices in the housing global agenda and urban development. And Ana Claudia was also a great promoter for the Yearbook. Ana Claudia, great to have you here.
Te escuchamos bien.
Perfecto.
Thank you, Luis. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and greetings to everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here today with my dear colleagues, with Executive President Sergio Díaz Granados,
President and CEO of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. Yo nada más voy a estar más adelante hablando con ustedes.
I will be talking to you later on, but I just wanted to take advantage of this moment to thank this cooperation institutionally. It's a great honor for participating in the initial kickoff of the project and to see that the project is right now growing and that it has an important relevance for Latin America in terms of connecting, as Sergio and Matt said, to connect the market policies to expand the impact in social terms, in terms of servicing the needs and the deficit of housing in Latin America. So it's an honor, and congratulations to CAF and Lincoln, congratulations for the achievement. Now, as Executive Director of United Nations Habitat, I would like that we are part of a greater coalition because the magnitude of the housing crisis today in the planet is really huge, and we cannot address these crises without alliances and partnerships and without information. So we begin with data and information. These are the starting point. As Mark said, this is to orient the markets, and as Sergio said, so that the institutions, agencies can prepare and to design policies that address the needs. And from United Nations, from UN Habitat, we will never have the capacity to give an answer to all the needs that we have. So this is why it's essential to work with you from Latin America. We have a lot of experiences, a lot of solutions, lots of advances. So the contribution of this housing yearbook is not only for Latin America, for all regions, because the crisis, housing crisis, is a common denominator in all parts of the world. So now I will go back and talk more about housing, but thank you very much for having me here today, and thank you for these cooperation from Latin America to the world. Thank you. Thank you, and great that you are here with us. I think that the initial messages are underlining that housing systems not only require political will and funding, but also clear information and evidence. And this is precisely where we believe that the Housing Yearbook makes sense, because it offers quantitative evidence to make decisions and for the decision-making of policy. So this not only expands the coverage to 15 countries, but this is a robust methodological framework with harmonized and comparable variables that allow to analyze from the macroeconomic and mortgage funding context to housing production, subsidies, sustainabilities, and land market. Now, to guide us through the yearbook structure and to share some of the most relevant findings of this edition, we have Claudia Magades. She's the editor of the Housing Yearbook, and she's a key part of the conceptual and methodological development of this platform of information. Claudia, thank you for being with us.
Thanking Sergio Diaz Granados, Meg, and Ana Claudia Rosbach for highlighting the importance of data. Also thanking CAF and Lincoln, its leaders and teams, for investing so much in this project, which is crucial for our region. And last, for all of you for inviting me to be a part of its construction. It's such a privilege. So we'll start with the motivation of this project. So first of all, closing critical information gaps. Everyone that preceded me already talked about it. So addressing the historical lack of harmonized housing data in the region. Data which is not still readily and publicly available, thus hampering better informed policies, fostering high-level debate, promoting a qualified evidence-based discussion amongst all stakeholders, enhancing policy design, so contributing to the creation of effective and efficient public policy so we can address the many challenges that we face, informing, monitoring and evaluation. That's also very important. So providing solid benchmarks for tracking progress and assessing impact, driving and guiding investment, stimulating and directing capital flows toward the housing sector, you know, starting from evidence-based investment, identifying invisible issues. That's also a major contribution of the yearbook. And I'd like to highlight gender and racial discrimination. So pinpointing data gaps and overlooked structural challenges. So the yearbook allows us to see all of that and our inspiration. So our inspiration comes from other regional yearbooks that started before us. So the Center for Affordable Housing Africa's yearbook, Cassia is here with us, and the Hypostat, the yearbook developed by the European Mortgage Federation. And we are all aligned with Hofinet, the pioneer of this effort. Marja is also here with us. So Hofinet is the Housing Finance Information Network. And as Ana Claudia mentioned, we are aiming for global cooperation, data standardization, and harmonization of indicators across the globe. Now, focusing again on Latin America and the Caribbean, our region faces many challenges. We all know persistent housing deficit, including a significant qualitative housing deficit. So we need better balancing of the need for new units with the urgent requirement for qualitative improvements, home upgrades, developing microfinance and all of that. So limited mortgage depth. We see the range here. So in most countries, as the range of outstanding mortgage portfolios to GDP shows, in most countries, we still have shallow mortgage markets, so we need to overcome structural barriers. Also, high labor informality it was also mentioned here already. Aging population, which affects housing needs and access to finance, high poverty levels and inequality, and we face an affordability crisis. So these are just, pinpointing a few of the regional challenges, and the yearbook provides us with data to better address those challenges. Now, the yearbook. So the countries that you see in yellow here in our map are the ones already covered by the yearbook. So you see that we already have extensive coverage across the region, and we intend to expand it even more. Also, so we cover 15 countries already. We have a very ample range of statistics, 261 variables, plus 8 cross-variable indicators. And later on, you see that once you open the database, you can do more cross-variable indicators as you see fit. And those variables cover 13 dimensions. So macroeconomics, housing markets, housing finance systems, funding, developers finance, mortgages, microfinance, informality, labor informality and its access to credit, and also housing informality. So subsidies and affordability, land markets, fiscal issues, sustainability, and inclusion. So the breadth of the yearbook is very comprehensive, and it's supposed to be this way. And the yearbook also offers countries' outlooks. So we have an analytical outlook for each country, trends, barriers, and opportunities that come up once we start digging into data, and also interesting case studies. So the yearbook is much more than just compilation of data. That's not our goal here. The yearbook is a robust infrastructure for data and analytics. And we already have, it's been mentioned here already, we already have 2 editions. So the 2024 edition, which was our first one, with 2023 data, the highlighted theme was affordability, widening income price gaps, limited credit access, and informal incomes, and so limited financing access for those. And housing informality is the theme of last year's yearbook. So the 2025 edition covers land access and financing, who accesses land and credit, and under what conditions. So the yearbook provides evidence for public policy design, research, and better informed decision-making for all stakeholders. So it answers structural questions with quantitative evidence, moving from assumptions to data-driven insights. It allows for conducting longitudinal studies and identifying key drivers. So tracking variables over time to determine the root causes of housing trends. Also understanding market mechanisms and dynamics, specifics of Latin America and the Caribbean, grasping the specific forces at play in our region, in our region's markets, and which present very distinct dynamics compared to the global north. The yearbook sheds light on the strategic questions. And here we just provide some examples of questions that you can have answered from the database of the yearbook. So do informal workers have access to housing credit? Are credit markets more developed and diversified in terms of credit products in the ecosystem of finance institutions and all institutions that are needed to develop deep credit markets? Is the housing deficit actually decreasing, or is it simply changing its form? Is the price to income ratio improving, or is affordability continuing to deteriorate, and where it is deteriorating? So green bonds and climate resilience. Are green bonds advancing as the new frontier for climate resilience in our housing sector? So these are just a few examples of questions that you can make and find answers through the Latin American and the Caribbean Housing Yearbook. So understanding the dynamics through reliable and periodically updated data. Here, again, some examples of views that you can make from the database. So here we have a graph of mortgage interest rates across the region, maximum income decile with access to subsidized mortgages, so we can talk about better targeting, price index, rate of change, so you can see how markets are evolving and how that affects affordability. Again, just a few examples. The database is open access and provides a lot of friendly search tools. So customizable search and visualization tools are very interesting. Please take a look at it as soon as you can. Dig into it. It's a relational database engine with a dynamic panel data format. And it's open source technology stack with data exportability. So you can do seamless downloads of all tables and data sets to Excel spreadsheets. For independent and customized analysis. Full transparency and traceability, that's a very important issue because all sources and all notes, not only methodological notes that define the variables, but also any explanatory notes that are needed are there, transparent, so you can understand the data that you're looking at and you can trace it back to its source. And that's it for me. Thank you so much. Such a privilege, such an honor, such a joy to be here with you today. Back to you, Luis.
Obrigado, Claudia. Muchas gracias por esta excelente presentación y por
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for this excellent presentation, for guiding on the yearbook structure and dynamics. As we have seen with comparable data, we can identify patterns and we can identify financial and public policies that aim at expanding access to housing. But other than gathering information, we have a key question. How can data transform effectively the way in which we design and implement housing policies? In order to go more in depth regarding this question, we're going to entail in a conversation or a panel from 3 international experts who have worked for years in the intersection between housing, funding, and information systems. We have today Ana Claudia Rosbach, Director of UN Habitat. We have Maria Hawk-Smith, Director of the International Housing Finance Program at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, and founder of the Hofinet initiative. We also have Keisha Rust, Executive Director of the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa and leader of the Financial Africa House's Yearbook, a pioneer initiative that has contributed to improving the housing market for 15 years in the continent. The conversation will be moderated by Julian Suarez Migliosi, Sustainable Territorial Development Manager of CAF. Julian, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Luis Felipe, and thank you everyone for being here in the launch of this second edition of the Housing Yearbook. And just as an introductory way of this panel, as you very well said, Luis Felipe, I would like to say that on behalf of CAF, and I also would like to say that on behalf of our colleagues of the Lincoln Institute, our vision of the Housing Yearbook is simple, and that is to contribute so that housing data can turn into a regional public good, reliable, comparable, and useful for decision-making, evidence-based decision-making to solve the huge challenge that Latin America and the Caribbean has in terms of housing. Of course, evidence-based, this means that we can connect better with the diagnosis and the design of public policies and their implementation, monitoring, and assessment, so as to create a virtuous circle that makes it possible to have policies that really work for the region. The executive president of the CAF talked about our report of economy and development of inherited inequalities, of how these inequalities perpetuate in the planet and how deterministic it is to solve housing for millions and millions of people in Latin America and the Caribbean. So it makes sense because this Housing Yearbook aims at becoming these public good asset as it was in the first edition, so that it can be used for decision makers. So this is precisely what we are going to discuss in this panel. This is much more than a yearbook, as Claudia put it, so that we can contribute to facilitate access to housing. And George said that even affordability issues have to do with better planning, and we are aiming at this with this contribution. So I have the huge privilege of having these exceptional global leaders who work in the intersection of housing and data. So I will be moderating with 2 rounds of questions, and then I will switch to English.
Claudia could do it in Portuguese or Spanish, but I'll go into English. So let's begin the panel with a global lens. My first round will be on how the housing crisis looks worldwide and why data governance, I'm referring to standardization, sharing, and transparency, matters for addressing it. So Ana Claudia, from a global perspective and considering your broad global experience, how will you characterize today's housing crisis, and how critical is data governance to addressing the challenges, particularly Latin America and the Caribbean faces? And I will also add, how does the UN Global Urban Data Coalition fit into these efforts?
Thank you so much, Julian, and also saying hello to my friends, Margia and Kestia. I have to say that a lot that I know, I learned with them. So just to make it clear now. But yes, we are facing a global housing crisis, as I mentioned before. The numbers that we deal with are, really extreme relevant. We talk about 3 billion people living in inadequate housing. We talk about more than 1 billion living in informal settlements, and you were referring to informality, Mac, Claudia, Sergio, in all the interventions. And then we also have, more urban dwellers coming to cities. So in the next couple of decades, we are going to have more than 2 billion people coming to cities, especially in Africa and Southeast Asia. And we're talking about cities that already are facing, several infrastructure and housing gaps. So this is the dimension. Of course, at the bottom of everything, it's poverty, it's inequality. We haven't been able as a society to overcome that. And as long as these structural factors remain, we will not solve the housing crisis. However, we can, at least improve the situation, and we can at least support markets to expand, and we can support governments and policymakers to strengthen the national policies, and at the city level, the land policies, as Mac was mentioning, one of the critical issues is this mismatch between the financial frameworks, the subsidies, the investments available, and how land and how cities are planned. So we can mitigate, let's say so, and work towards the big picture. So at the bottom line is data. We miss data, and I will talk later on informality, but also we don't have data, on markets, especially in the global south, and also very scarce data on policy. And we need this data, because if we don't have this data, it's difficult to monitor the situation, and it's difficult to provide both markets and governments inputs, critical inputs for them to plan their business models, and governments should develop their policies. One critical process that we are facilitating as UN Habitat is the open-ended working group on housing. This is an intergovernmental process. This is a critical part of the work of UN Habitat. We set, norms, and we guide policy. So we have about 50 member states, 50 countries that are looking at housing as a central aspect of their policies. And we expect to facilitate this open-ended working group until 29, and to offer several inputs in terms of what are the practices and what's the data, what's the information. And because of the gaps that we face and the limitations of the capacity of UN Habitat, we set up this very important initiative, the Global Data Coalition. And this is where we want to work with you, with several organizations to use all the technology that we have available, satellite, AI, but also our boots on the ground. We also found out in Latin America, in the process of thinking and developing the initial stages of the yearbook, that we do have a lot of information, but we need to come together and unlock this information. So therefore, we need a coalition, and therefore, this yearbook is so important for the work we do at the global level at UN Habitat. Back to you, Julian.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ana Claudia. Such an honor to have you here. Thank you very much for being here, and for being, of course, the leader and the founder from Lincoln Institute of Land Policy at the time, and now being here with us. Bottom line, what you said, what I hear from you is that the governance of data is just as important as the data itself. And your point highlights why initiatives like the UN Global Urban Data Coalition matter so much. And it also speaks directly to the spirit behind the Housing Yearbook by CAF and the Lincoln Institute, helping make housing data more comparable, accessible, and ultimately more useful for better policy decisions to solve market failures and strengthen public policy. So let me now turn to the question of standardization and global comparability, because this is where initiatives like COFINET and regional yearbooks become so valuable. So Marja, turning now into housing finance, and considering the work you've done for decades on housing data collection and data development globally, but particularly leading the COFINET initiative, what do you think are the main structural barriers that still limit access to housing finance in emerging markets? And how can better data help governments and financial institutions design more inclusive and resilient housing finance systems?
Thank you for having me at this very festive occasion, and congratulations to all of you. First, I must say that it is a major, major achievement As nearly all of you in the room will know, we started Hofinet in 2010, around that time, when there was really a crisis, and there was this feeling that housing markets were not working. They were dysfunctional, and particularly the housing finance markets. And we didn't have information. We didn't have comparable information globally, not on markets, not on detailed policies and subsidies that were linked to the housing finance system. That was not available. The OECD, UN Habitat, IMF, and BEAS, they have some data, but it was and felt that there was a big gap, particularly in market information and the finance systems and subsidies related to finance. So, because I was the director of the International Housing Finance Program and had been so since 1985, the group that convened asked me to address the standardization of data and the collection of data globally. So that's what we did. We standardized the data with a lot of input from global housing finance institutions, other institutions. We really tried to make sure that the definitions that we would use to collect meaningful information and data would be useful and for the global housing finance institutions, ministries of housing, and so on. So we did that, and we worked in 65 countries. We had data on 130 countries. We made it all available on a public, now very old-fashioned platform. But we made a beginning, and the fact that we had 35,000 individual users in 190 countries showed that this was information that was much needed by the players. So now the Hofinet effort is away from Wharton, and it is integrating with the European Mortgage Federation, which is a very good place for it to be, because the European Mortgage Federation also is affiliated with an organization that is called ISMA, and that is an organization of secondary mortgage finance institutions globally. So in other words, it has a lot of institutional connections and networks that the data collection effort now can link into. So we focus now more narrowly on market information and housing finance. And that is also because of the regional effort. We work with CAF. We have worked with CAF from the inception. This is CAF Sub-Saharan Africa and CAF in Latin America. We work with the Asian Pacific group on data collection. So it is really an important platform, it makes it clear that all these individual efforts are critically important, but that the global system, the sum of all these individual efforts, is worth even more. So that is, we started because of crisis. We started because there was clearly a need at that time, but crises have not stopped, and they will not. So we need very good information to be ahead of the curve. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Crisis has definitely not stopped. And I'd say it's probably even harder than a decade ago, probably. What you're saying speaks directly to the value of initiatives like Hofinet. Efforts such as the one we're launching today seek to advance a similar agenda by making housing data comparable and accessible across countries. And this is quite a powerful reminder that without comparability, standardized policy, standardized data, policy learning, policy design becomes even harder. And of course, data challenges are not only technical, they are also structural, and particularly in regions where housing markets operate partly informally, like Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much. So, Keisha, now let me start with you by saying that we're very pleased and grateful to you and the center you run for having been so generous in sharing your insights and experience. When we first came up with the idea of this yearbook for Latin America and the Caribbean, your insights were both inspirational for our team and quite a shortcut for us. So thank you very much. And having said that, and given your experience leading the housing yearbook for the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa for more than 15 years, what specific challenges do regions like Africa, and why not Latin America, face when trying to collect data and monitor housing markets that function, at least in part, informally?
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor and pleasure to be with you all today, and to be part of this great opportunity to showcase this book that you've put together. Congratulations, Claudia and Kath and Lincoln. It's really wonderful. It's also so nice, excuse me, to have somebody to talk to about it so that we actually can exchange now, because there are partners in other continents who are doing the same thing. So thank you for that opportunity. You asked particularly about informal markets. I want to start with formal because our markets in Africa, we don't even have the data for formal markets. Mortgages are ostensibly regulated by central banks, but they can't tell us how many they have. They don't have that data readily available, or they won't. And that is part of the advocacy that we're part of, is to try and drive the importance of data collection by regulators who already exist, and to share that data into the market so that we can all be more intelligent about how that market operates. Housing starts. Nobody knows how many houses are being built. It shouldn't be a difficult thing to count. They're fairly obvious. But yet that data is not finding its way into central places. And then when you look at the established institutions that have been collecting data, so we look to the World Bank and we look to the African Development Bank and other institutions like that, the data that they're publishing certainly has a lot of housing points, but doesn't bring it together into a housing story. So what's very special about HOFINET, about the Latin American yearbook, about the work that we're doing, is that it's housing specific, and it tells that whole story and wraps it together. In terms of informality, one of the challenges with that is that because it's informal, it's not just that we can't see it because we're not counting it, but we don't yet know how it works. And we have to understand the way in which those informal systems work, and then identify what are the points of data that can be collected from those behaviors, and then establish mechanisms to collect that data. So in some ways, just by collecting the data, we may be making it somehow formal because we're making it visible. And we are participating in the evolution of those practices by naming them and presenting them. So there's a lot to think about there, about how do we collect the data. There are definitions that get used that have political implications that we have to guard against, and find ways to support what we like to say is a recognition of the way it really works. Whether or not that's called formal or informal, how does it work in real life? How do real people access housing and pay for it? And can we develop the indicators and the metrics to count that? One of the issues that I also wanted to talk about, and we saw it in one of Claudia's slides, the one where you talk about the regional observations, and one of them was like 2% to 79%. We have huge diversity in our markets, and that's across the continent, but also within the countries themselves, and frankly, even at city level. An average doesn't work if it's a calculation of a high number and a low number, and there's no one living in the middle with what that number is. And so we have to be so much more careful in the way that we understand the numbers and the way we present them, because of where the activity actually is, and it's not evenly distributed. Our markets are so unequal and skewed for so many reasons, most of which Maria has taught us about. And so to be able to represent them properly, we have to be quite careful about the kinds of indicators we use and how we use them. We were very happy to collect national level data, and we continue to do that, but increasingly, I'm seeing that we need to be much more emphatic about local level data as well. And I know that we're working as a national yearbook, and how many countries in yours, we have 54, we have to include. But the variety even within that becomes so important to understand, because what's happening, for example, in Nairobi is very different than what's happening in Kisumu, and each can tell us something about the other. The last point, I think, is longitudinal. And so we've been doing this for 15 years, but the data we were collecting in 2015, we were a little bit lax with our definitions. We've learned a lot from Maria on that, about tightening our definitions and being more careful. But housing systems change themselves as well. And so the definition kind of has to evolve, and we have to develop an intelligence for understanding old data with our new minds and experience. And I don't know if we've solved that properly yet, because as a baseline changes, the way a particular number features in the context is different. So we have to be alive all the time. It's why I keep on saying we have to do this every year, because people are alive and transacting and building houses and buying them and living in them every single year. And even if it seems like it's slow, we have to be able to catch the nuance in between, because that's when those markets start to shift. So I'm so glad to have a partner in, well, is it not really crime, but in adventure, in doing this with us. And Maria, isn't that nice that we're all now holding hands and doing it together?
Very.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Keisha. That's quite a relevant point, what you're making, and that connects directly with the purpose of the yearbook with a strong framing. It contributes to tell the whole story and wraps it up all together, but there's a huge diversity and averages do not work. So yes, we need to be very, very careful with the indicators and the data that we collect here. We're also very proud to connect with you, to partner with you, and to learn from the experience of your center. So thank you again. Now, let's go deeper into how data connects or could connect better with policy and reform. And Ana Claudia, going back to you in the second round of questions, housing inadequacy and informal settlements remain a central dimension of the housing crisis in many countries. You were talking about 1 billion people living in informal settlements. We're saying 25% of the population in Latin America and the Caribbean. So in this regard, how can better data help translate diagnosis into more effective housing policies to solve such a huge challenge the world and Latin America and the Caribbean in particular face?
Thank you so much, Julian. So first of all, we are also the custodians of SDG 11. Let's remember that we are just a couple of years, towards 2030. And the SDG 11.1 talks about housing, talks about informal settlements. And Marja and Kesia were talking about definition. You're going to be surprised. We don't have a global definition for informal settlements. UN Habitat has a definition for an informal household, but not a settlement. I mentioned in my first intervention the open-ended working group on housing. This is one of the tasks for this year ahead. to find a common definition of informal settlements. Also homelessness, by the way, we don't have a common definition on homelessness. So the data that we collect, is heterogeneous. So it's important that we have at least a common definition agreed globally so that we can measure, at the global level, and we can fulfill our mandate as UN Habitat to start with. Also offer this information to member states, to countries, to cities, so that they can design their policies accordingly. However, we need to respect and understand that perhaps harmonization is too much to expect at all levels, and that definitions will be different in different contexts, in different countries, in different regions, right? So this is the dichotomy of informality. So we'll have to accept that eventually there will be social contracts or agreements in a certain countries that will, indicate, for example, in Brazil, the name is favela, in Argentina, barrios populares, and so on and so forth, right? And this is a social contract. And then what really, is the limit of an informal settlements? But we need a global one because we need to monitor and we need to inform those who are ready to have a definition. So this is one aspect in terms of public policy in general. And we have to understand that we cannot address housing only in these informal settlements. We need to look at infrastructure, at integrating to the city, the social component, and etc. If we look at the housing only, and then both Kesha and Marja were talking about the informal housing markets, and Lincoln has been working a lot on the informal housing markets in Latin America in the past. We only have few researchers, and CAF, thanks for the work that you are doing, that are looking at that. And this data is very difficult to collect. It needs really, presence on the ground. It really needs connection. And it's very complex to collect this data because there are other, challenges related to that. But I think we have to keep pursuing that and have more information. Why? Because there are other housing solutions, incremental housing, backyard dwellings, recycling of the building environment. So the financial institutions, they can also develop, different types of financial products to address these needs. And with the private sector, the small, medium enterprises, they can come in and fill gaps that the big developers are not able to fill. And so that's the critical importance of really amplifying, trying to connect our forces, our capacities to have better understanding of the informal sector, but understanding that this data is scarce, not perfect, and eventually will never be 100% harmonized. I will apologize, Julian, friends, I have to leave now. I have a hard stop. But it was great. Thank you very much, and congratulations, Lincoln and CAF.
Julian, you're muted.
Oops, I'm sorry, Luis Felipe. Thank you. I was just saying, thank you very much, Ana Claudia. Such a pleasure, so insightful having you here. Please feel free to go. We know your agenda has a meeting that started 2 minutes ago. So just to point out what you said, the relevance of having a common understanding, what is it that we're all talking about? And the relevance also of thinking out of the box, and she brought, Ana Claudia brought, the relevance of innovating, right? Particularly an agenda that is key for us, multilateral financial development institutions. So now going back to Marja, and we'll hurry up a bit. Let me turn back to you. And from your perspective, Marja, looking at regions such as Latin America and the Caribbean, why do you think housing data remains so persistent? The data gaps remain so persistent. And how do you see initiatives like the Latin America and the Caribbean Housing Yearbook can contribute to closing those gaps? And I'd also add, in a world where AI and new technologies are advancing so rapidly, why does the underlying work of building consistent, structured data system remain so important?
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, it is a difficult question to answer. Why, in a rather developed continent like the Latin American and Caribbean region, there is still such a data gap? And what my perception is of having worked in the region a lot is that we know, for instance, in Africa, the problems are different. There are very few data collecting entities, but in the LAC region, it's different. And I think why we don't have consolidated sound data has a lot to do with the segmentation of the housing system, and particularly the housing finance system in Latin America. You have, from history, a lot of countries with very deep provident fund housing subsidized systems in different forms. And they operate sort of very separately from where the market, the housing market is, and the housing market finances. These systems do not always talk to each other very nicely, and they don't share data. And if I go to the central bank of many countries, I may find the data on the depth of the sector, the size of the mortgage market, only for the private sector, because the other sectors have a different regulator. And a different regulator for subsidized systems, for microfinance for housing, they don't collect the data in the same way. So the segmentation of the market institutions, they prevent very often the compilation of meaningful data for the entire sector. So, and the microfinance sector is particularly, while it's very critical for the informal market, for informally employed, it is often not collecting data that it should be and can do. So the microfinance market needs a lot of support in the collection of data. And if that comes on board, it becomes much more of a powerful tool. So we already mentioned the informality of the housing sector, and that, of course, makes quantification indicators very, very difficult. But what I want to emphasize is that the yearbook can fill a very important gap by providing a baseline and building up expertise for local, national housing entities and regulators to begin to improve the data. So if the yearbook sets the baseline, then it becomes possible for other entities to begin to collect the data using the definitions. They don't have to begin from scratch. So that is exceedingly important, I think. So the function of the yearbook goes beyond its practicality and usefulness into really stimulating the whole system to become more efficient, more data driven, and so on. And what the yearbook, both the Sub-Saharan yearbook and the CAF yearbook, as well as EMF, the European yearbook, what they contribute is that the data is placed in the context of the specific situation in each country. And that's very, very important, because the Latin American finance system is really completely different from that particularly from Africa. And so to have that contextual data is very important. So I think that these yearbooks and the LAC yearbook in particular, because of your segmented system, will play a very important role for the development of the entire system. So I'm very, very happy about that.
Thank you.
The last point I would like to make, because I think this is my last chance to talk, is that in the current environment where AI systems and alternative data are getting very, very important. So alternative data that are not precisely defined, but give a feeling of where the sector is going. Very important because they are very timely. But if they are not grounded in good, solid, basic data collection, data systems, we have no way of really knowing how far off the reality these alternative data systems are. Also, with AI being prominent, and I'm teaching, and there is not a student paper that doesn't use AI. I therefore know that garbage in, garbage out. It is as simple as that. If we don't have solid data in this time and age, we are really in trouble. So it is the more important to benchmark our data and have solid information in this time where we are just at the beginning, but it will escalate very soon. So then, of course, the question is, how do you move to a networking model within AI, and how do you pay for open source data? But that's a different question, not for this meeting, most likely. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marcia. That really underscores how essential strong data foundations are. And even as new technologies emerge, initiatives like this Yearbook play a key role in ensuring that the underlying data, the baseline, are robust and comparable. And you also brought the contextual data that is certainly quite an issue. So thanks again. We're moving to the last question. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Our corporate vice president is waiting for the closing remarks, and he had a meeting as well. He's here with us. So Keisha, going straight to you and talking about what changes once countries begin to see themselves through a consistent data mirror year after year. So based on your experience in Africa, what lessons or best practices do you think are particularly relevant for the LAC Housing Yearbook? And do you see any significant changes once countries and institutions start seeing themselves on a comparative basis?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. Our original motivation was to mainstream the reality and the opportunity, because no one was talking about housing. It was sort of affordable housing was something that governments did, and then the private sector went and built high value, but there wasn't a conversation. Developers weren't talking to financiers. It just wasn't and there was very little research. So what we wanted to do was to just document, what does it look like in every country? What's happening? And then we segmented it by broadly the segments of the housing value chain. And in the course of that, we created almost a dependency on an annual publication that sets out what does that housing sector look like this year. And I think it did change. What's happened now is our yearbook is very widely cited by, it's used in newspaper articles. We know that investors are using it constantly in their submissions. We provide high-level data. I like to think that they should know all this stuff already. But the fact that they're using what we're providing suggests that, in fact, it's not so easily available elsewhere. Every single investor I've spoken to has said that they've used our yearbook as their introduction. Some people said that they tore out the first page and the pages for the country when they went into a country. So they have that. What that also then does is it creates, because the governments are doing the same thing, they're also reading these reports and they're interested in seeing how are other people seeing us. So presumably they know what's happening in their country. There are certain sections perhaps where it's news to them, but they're also very interested in how we reflect it to them. And then there is a common platform for discussion between the private sector and the public sector because they have that same information. There's a big responsibility that comes with that. We've been very generous because of with our approach to referencing. We're rigorous. We demand excellent referencing. It has to be precise, but it can be a conversation. And then we would put a warning next to it. How far can you actually? Because so much of what's happening in our markets has not yet been documented. If it's really important, obviously we will check and verify as much as we can and have a pretty good sense that we believe and trust that this is valuable information. If we find out that it's not true, then we would apologize. And we work very, very hard to make sure that it's accurate. But we can't just demand data that comes from the internet because it doesn't exist on the internet yet. We're putting it on the internet by the act of undertaking the research ourselves. So it becomes, and what we have seen in the past, which I really would warn you to guard against, is circular referencing. So we quoted a number that was said in a speech by a politician, and that number is now in national policy as something that we said. And so each source quotes the previous source and not their source. Mm-hmm. And it's a constant conversation we have to have, accept the fact that sometimes there's going to be mistakes and be honest about it and engage in it. In the context of AI, the thing that's so special, Maria, I think what we're all doing, Claudia, and in our contexts, is we're collecting data that's not yet on the internet. And by putting it there, we are trying to share it in a way so that when an AI goes looking, they find the truth rather than making it up. It's an ongoing debate that we all have to have together, but feel confident. We've created a conversation, certainly on this continent. People cite the yearbook all the time. It's become our business card as CAF. Everybody knows us for that. We do a lot of other things, but the thing they really know is the yearbook. And so there is responsibility in the quality that you put out and the humility with which you offer it, that it might actually be something that needs to be constantly evaluated, and sometimes an apology might be necessary. I hope that that's acceptable in the context of these markets we're working in. That's certainly the approach we've taken.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, I think we ran out of time. I'd say just if there's one message that clearly emerges from this conversation is that better housing policy begins with better info. And I'll just finish on this, and I will pass the word, and I'm going back to Spanish, to Cristiana Cinelli, quien es nuestro vicepresidente corporativo de programación estratégica y líder en CAF, que está impulsando esta agenda.
Asinelli, Corporate Vice President of Strategic Programming of CAF. And now I give the floor to Christian, and I would like to thank the work of our team, Emil Rodriguez, Director of the area, and his team, Pablo, Amparo, Mariana, and all the management team. And thank you for being here and postponing the meeting you had. Thank you, Julian, and thank you everyone for connecting to this event in this launch of the second issue of the Latin American Caribbean Housing Yearbook of the CAF and the Lincoln Institute. As it was said initially from Sergio Diaz Granados and George McCartney, well, I would like to also thank Ana Claudia and Marta, Kesia, Claudia, Luis Felipe, Luis Julian, and all the teams who made this possible. And in particular, I would like to thank Emil Rodriguez Garabot, who's the director of Habitat and Sustainable Mobility, together working with this agenda together with the rest of the team. And this is so important because when we talk about housing, we talk about people. When we talk about housing, we talk about planning. And when we talk about housing, as our executive partner president said, we're talking about the dreams of people. And as development bank, when we talk about housing, we talk about development, not only about infrastructure. A month ago, we were with many of those who are here with Ana Claudia in the International Economic Forum that took place in Panama. We had a specific experience regarding social housing as engine for development. And we saw that 1 out of 5 dwellers of our region is living in conditions and settlements or conditions that are inadequate. And these are not just figures. These are not just indicators of structural things that are lacked. This is a situation where we have to position ourselves because these are injustices. And when from think tanks and development bank and or multilateral organizations, when we have the opportunity of changing the reality, this is a moral obligation. It's a moral duty. So for us, this is a call to action. It's a call to action because housing is not only a right, it also implies labor insertion, continuity of children's education. It's also economic progress, and this economic progress needs to be fueled on a daily basis with our public policies. And this has to do with closing the gaps, social, infrastructural, and economic gaps. And one of the gaps that needs to be closed, and this is why we are organizing these conversations, and this is why we did this yearbook, and is to be able to close the housing gaps. And then once again, this is not just a dwelling, it's a multi-dimensional issue: environment, work, education, decent conditions in which our inhabitants of Latin America and the Caribbean need to live. We know that at a worldwide level, we're going under complex situation, obviously, in our region because of a crisis with the rent. There's not enough offers in the housing market and low income. So therefore, there's difficulties to have access to credits or mortgages. So this requires a strong state with capacity building in order to be able to cover the whole and comprehensive situation, not only physical infrastructure, but institutional infrastructure. The panel shared data and figures, and they talked about how we can improve the quality of our public policies. And this is where we can offer a differential by getting together multilateral organizations, think tanks, civil society organizations, private and public sector, so that we can all change the paradigm. This is necessary in order to address public housing policies. Now, to close, because the meeting went a couple of minutes more, but I would like to highlight the initial idea with which we started. Having access to a housing unit is not only that, but it implies a development vision, because people are behind this housing unit. There are children, boys, girls, teenagers with dreams, and they feel that by having access to a housing unit, they can have a qualitative leap in the quality of lives. And this is what we do as Development Bank. This is why we work with the private sector as allies, as partners, to change the quality of lives of millions of inhabitants in Latin America and the Caribbean. Once again, thank you for all of those who made this yearbook possible. But the challenge remains to keep on offering real solutions to change people's lives and quality. Thank you very much, Christian, for these final reflections, and Mir for the leadership in this project. So with this, we conclude our webinar. Thank you all for staying with us. And before we say goodbye, I would like to thank everyone for making this possible. Our colleagues of CAF and the Lincoln Institute, Claudia Magalhães, and all the consultants who cooperated in drafting the yearbook, our panel members, because it was a very inspiring and enriching conversation, and also everyone who has joined from different parts of a region and the world. The Latin American Caribbean Housing Yearbook is an evolving project. We are already working on the third edition, and this is why we're interested in knowing your impressions, comments, or suggestions. Our purpose is that this initiative keeps on growing and consolidating as a regional platform for knowledge and exchange among those who work to improve the housing systems in our region. We invite you all to explore the yearbook online, use the data and information, and keep on being part of the conversation. Without further ado, thank you very much for being with us today, and let's all